Is PSO2 shutting down soon? This question has crossed a lot of our minds, and I'm here to speculate on it from the side of yes. Yes, I believe that Sega will shut down PSO2. I don't think they'll do it this year, but I do think they'll do it over the next year to year and a half. Why would they do this? Lack of profitability, lack of popularity, and cost of keeping servers running, mostly. Though, of course, I shouldn't say that without some evidence to back it up, so let's dive into the history of Sega shutting down its PSO titles. Our story starts long ago in a galaxy not so far from whatever galaxy PSO2 takes place in, on a single planet called Regal. Released in 2001 for the Dreamcast in both the US and Japan, PSO, the first one, was the first publicly available online multiplayer console game ever. Later, it was also released on the GameCube and Xbox with numerous bug fixes, an expansion to the level cap from 100 to a daunting 200 which few players ever reached, and a bunch of quality of life fixes. A raving success, Sega went and murdered it with a fiery vengeance. Mostly against the US players, but eventually the Japanese players saw its downfall as well. US Dreamcast servers were shuttered on September 2003, while both the American and Japanese GameCube servers were closed on March 30th, 2007, following a month of free service. That's right, it was in fact pay to get online. Japanese Xbox servers finally closed on January 31st, 2007, with the US servers closing on April 22 of the same year, a week earlier than announced. Fair warning, but this will become a trend. The English PC servers for Blue Burst, which was the Episode 4 expansion of the Xbox and GameCube game, closed March 31st, 2008, while the Japanese servers were closed on December 27th, 2010, approximately 2.5 years later. Now, it's worth noting that you can still play PSO1 through dedicated servers, thanks to a little-known US law established by the Library of Congress that allows online games that are no longer available to be recreated for archival purposes so long as they are non-profit. A link to that law will be available in the information for this video, but it is far too long for me to post an image of here or really go into discussing, so let's move on. Phantasy Star Universe, which you might consider the spiritual prequel to PSO2, was released globally in late 2006 for PS2, Xbox 360, and Windows PC, with an expansion released in 2007, 2008 for those systems respectively. The English-speaking servers were collectively shuttered in early 2010, while the Japanese servers retained majority support until 2012. Closure was cited as being due to lack of popularity in both cases, but there might have been a bit of a extra reason. All of these shutdowns were, by Sega's own eventual admission, in preparation for the sequel PSO2. PSO2 was launched in Japan on July 4, 2012, nearly 1.5 years after the final closure of the OG PSO servers. While US and EU players joined Japanese servers for some time, there were several large IP-based ban waves that took out a majority of the English-speaking player base. Sega Japan clearly was not interested in the massive English-speaking interest in the game. PSO2 was also released on the handheld PS Vita on February 2013, and subsequently killed off in August 2020 in preparation for the Xbox and PC global release. Here's where things get a little bit interesting if you've been following along. According to Sega COO Naoya Tsurumi, Phantasy Star Online 2 took over 5 years to develop, meaning that its development started at about the time that PSO shut down for good. Fortunately, PSO2 NGS did not take the same actions. This is in large part because the shell for PSO2 NGS is in fact PSO2. The issue with the fact that one game is a shell and the other is a new game is that you do not actually require the shell to run the game. It is simply a technical template. So when I asked friends if they think PSO2 will shut down, many said no, and their reasonings were threefold: profitability, popularity, and PSO2 being the base game, or shell. I'll get to the first two, but let me say this about the latter. This argument is invalid, sadly. The base game is not needed for the sequel. Unlike a normal expansion pack that is added to the base game files, NGS is built upon a proxy clone. In fact, you don't even need base PSO2 installed to play NGS, and yes, I did test this during the beta. Second, other games come to mind when we think about using a shell to either run a new game or make a separate game. Let's take my second all-time favorite game, Ingress, as an example. Ingress 1.0 is the shell. Ingress 2.0, aka Ingress Prime, was built on top of Ingress 1.0 and replaced it. However, Ingress 1.0 eventually shut down and was no longer playable. Additionally, both Pokemon Go and Wizards Unite use the maps and portals of Ingress as the shell for their own skins, but they are both standalone games that do not require any of each other to be installed simultaneously to play. So this argument falls short. PSO2 does not need to exist for PSO2 NGS to exist. If PSO2 ever shuts down, Sega would merely migrate player accounts to the remaining service. Historically, many games have done this, but I'm not going to list them all, so Ingress is what you get. Let's look at argument 2, profitability. PSO2 is slowing down the availability of its purchasable in-game benefits, especially and perhaps most importantly, the Season Pass tickets that encourage replayability. Season Passes encourage replayability. You can argue with me about that in the comments if you so choose, but that's where I stand. They are limiting AC redeemable options in the base game as well, and only rehashing old content for AC scratches. It's entirely possible that this slowdown could lead to an eventual halt, much as it did in PSO2 Vita, where Sega slowed down and halted AC and SG purchases and converted them into SG at a severely reduced conversion rate of 50%. Profitability alone cannot be truly assessed without looking at the primary argument against shutdown: popularity. PSO2 is clearly very popular. Or is it? While the global release of the game used to boast a huge amount of players, almost maxing out all the blocks on all the servers at once, most of these players are now on Ship 1. A majority of those players seem to be on Steam, just looking at the numbers on Steam charts versus the number of players in-game at any given time, which is easily checked by looking at the blocks list. And there's just nobody really streaming it that much anymore either. I've been checking over the past week at the Prime US evening times for streamers and viewers, and the viewers never seem to break 1,000. Heck, they're not breaking 300. Heck, today when I looked at it around 5 p.m. Central Time, it was at 90. Popularity, discoverability, population, all of this is falling off and will eventually lead to Sega declaring the game unsustainable due to server costs. PSO2 and PSO2 NGS are on different physical servers, and one is clearly slipping into obscurity. When NGS releases, it will slip considerably more. Now I have one last point before I give you my prediction. Some people I've talked to have argued that all games lose numbers as the years wear on. This is, well, it's just not true. Compare the Steam chart numbers for PSO2 with 2 other games that have been replaced by better titles or faced major player base killing patches and... oh, wait, no, they're doing just fine. People will make this argument with MMOs in comparison to World of Warcraft all the time. Every new MMO is the quote-unquote WoW killer, but that's simply false. WoW will never die except by its own hands. Heck, a constitutional gaffe by Blizzard barely even dented their player base in the US when even Congress people were telling the company to fix the issues or face consequences. Democrats and Republicans both were saying this to Blizzard, that it was unconstitutional what they did, but the player base didn't really take a hit. That's why this argument isn't valid. The only thing that will kill any game is its own decisions to shutter its own service, which Sega has already taken steps to do. Now the question is no longer if, but when will they pull that lever? If I were to make a rough estimate of how long PSO2 will be around for, it's a 2-part answer. The first part is on Sega's end. I expect based on the timelines of their previous closures that PSO2, the base game, will go offline sometime between summer 2022 and fall 2023. I'm leaning more towards the former. The second part is if PSO2 will live on through dedicated citizen servers like PSO1 has. This is a difficult question. I can't say who, but this was in the works before and only ended because of PSO2's release in the US. If it shuts down on Sega's end, these servers might resume development, but it never quite got as far as being fully functional before due to technical differences of what data was stored client-side versus server-side in PSO2. Unlike PSO1 and PSU, it is much harder to replicate a game when most of its components were loaded server-side. But this is a question for the not-so-near future, and perhaps if Sega is feeling nice, which have they ever? Maybe they could make that part of things open source when they do inevitably shut things down. Because much like with PSO1, which I still play every week, I want to keep playing PSO2, even if I'm playing PSO2 NGS as well. It is, after all, my favorite game series of all time. If you made it this far, consider hitting the subscribe button. I will be putting out content on PSO2 NGS theory, story, and builds as soon as it comes out, in addition to my usual content of assorted game reviews, silly game challenges, and the Free Day Fridays series covering the newest free games on Steam every week. So long for now, Voss.